when you're in a marginalized group, the strength in numbers mentality is kind of a reversal that you can sort of pull on the quote unquote oppressors. You can sort of flip by connecting and creating a very human network and showing like, no, there's actually a lot of us. I'm not alone. I'm not one person that you can just, knock down because I have other people to help me get back up.
Welcome to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering children and adults through education, advocacy, and research by sharing the stories and experiences relevant to the TS community. Hello, and welcome back to The Uptick. It's been several weeks since our last episode. There's been a lot going on in my life and with NJCTS, and we're excited to get back to our regular cadence of episodes. Today, we've got two incredible members of the NJCTS community here. Peyton Estabrook, who's a longstanding community member and a participant of the NJCTS Community Connections program, and Alina Lawas Osborn, program coordinator for NJCTS. Alina hosts the NJCTS Community Connections program, which Peyton is a member of and participates in regularly. And this is an interesting program. It started in 2001 after former executive director Faith Rice passed away. It was really a way to honor and continue her legacy of connecting people with Tourette. But this is really a safe space for young adults with Tourette to share their experiences about life, and not just about Tourette, but whatever they want to discuss, dating, life, jobs, you name it. It started off as a young professional support group and then has kind of evolved into just being adults talking, mentoring, hanging out, discussing topics relevant to the Tourette community. Really a judgment-free, safe space to talk about these topics for people who get it. Alina, I'd love to turn things over to you. If you'd like to share a little bit about your connection to Community Connections as the host of it and sort of how you see your vision being for it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Community Connections is really a joy to host. I was not the first host. I didn't learn this until I think I had been at NJCTS for at least a year. I've been there 2 years now. But I was actually one of the first members of Community Connections as a community member, along with Peyton, when it started in, I think, 2021. But I didn't realize it was such a new program when I started going as a community member. And then at some point I was job searching, a Community Connections meeting was coming up, and I thought to myself, I wonder if these folks are hiring. And they were looking for a program coordinator, and it was a really good fit. So it really kind of came full circle. I run the program now. I think it's going pretty well. It's really a joy and an honor to be able to provide a space, a safe space, and for adults with Tourette's to sometimes sort of like an unofficial support group. We're not licensed counselors here, so it's not like a support group in the sense of like group therapy or anything, but it's a good way for folks to be able to just kind of talk through stuff they're going through around Tourette syndrome, and everyone there gets it. So it's a really good space where people can really understand each other and empathize with each other. Folks talk a lot about other things aside from Tourette related matters too. It's a good place for people to meet each other and find similar interests. I've seen some friendships form outside of the group, or friendships from in the group go to outside of the group, which has been really cool to watch.
Of that. Peyton, I know you've been on many of the Community Connections events in person and also virtual, because we do both. You've been in this for a long time. Would love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on what got you joining it and what you value about this program.
Yeah, so I think I had been getting these emails for a little while because I think either during 2020 or 2021, I had participated in a few online programs. For example, Jason Michaels, a magician with Tourette's, did an online little magic show, and it was really awesome. It was really cool to see that there was this guy out there with Tourette's doing magic, and he's super fantastic and charismatic, really interesting guy, and really great show. And So after that, I think I started getting those emails about like, hey, there's this group. I sort of ignored it for a while because I think I told you guys kind of prior to this, I was very kind of self-conscious and I was just worried about being judged. I was worried about being like on camera in front of people. Anyway, so I basically been in the group for I'd say about like 2 years. But apparently, it wasn't around for that much longer.
One of the things with community connections that I like is it brings people together, people from wherever you are, could be anywhere in the world, adults with Tourette syndrome. And I think historically, when we think about Tourette, it's for many people, it's been a very isolating condition historically. And I was diagnosed back in 2003. And then things were getting, that's certainly better in terms of than if it had been in the 1950s or before that. But I didn't know anyone else with it for the first number of years after being diagnosed. In childhood, I grew up in a rural Indiana town, didn't know others with it, and it was really through programming, through Tourette-based organizations that I eventually got to meet other people with it. And then you run into a challenge where if you're not in a city or in a state that has a vibrant chapter or Tourette organized practice, you wouldn't be able to benefit from those. So this is neat in that there are in-person activities that Community Connections hosts, but also primarily virtual in terms of its regular cadence of get-togethers. So that allows people wherever they are to really take part in this and get value out of it. Peyton, would love to hear a little bit about some of the value you've gotten. I mean, I appreciate the courage you took in this being something that you maybe didn't feel comfortable sharing about your Tourette. It felt like, all right, is this really a safe space where I can do that? And it seems like you've really navigated through that to get to a point where you're going to these actively contributing. You've led some of the community connection sessions. Would love to hear in your words a little bit about the value you've gotten out of it.
Michael, I can definitely agree. I think I was watching a YouTube video where it was talking about this sci-fi writer who he was gay and he was sort of in the closet because it was, I forget if it was the 1980s, 1990s, and obviously that wasn't as accepted. And basically, I forget if it was something he wrote about. He went to some sort of a gathering of gay men. And the numbers that he saw, he realized the danger of, I guess, oppression. The danger of oppression is that it isolates people. And sort of the antidote to that almost is the connecting of people. So when you have people in kind of a marginalized group, whether that's gay men or gay women or, anybody in the LGBTQ plus community, when you're in a marginalized group, the strength in numbers mentality is kind of a reversal that you can sort of pull on the quote unquote oppressors. You can sort of flip by connecting and creating a very human network and showing like, no, there's actually a lot of us. I'm not alone. I'm not one person that you can just, knock down because I have other people to help me get back up.
Alina, curious if, in hosting these sessions, if you've noticed any kind of patterns in what people want to discuss, questions they have, what they talk about, or if you're welcome to kind of respond or give your thoughts on what Peyton had said there.
Well, we usually have several regular members, and that show up on a slow day. 3 regular members on a busier day, 5 regulars, and then handful or 2 of irregular members and new folks too. So I think it's usually a group of probably 8 to 10 people at the moment. And it varies. I think in larger groups, if it's all people that are regulars and have developed a rapport with one another, it can get pretty personal as well. If it's a group where there's a lot of new people usually don't jump into sharing a lot of personal information at the beginning, which is perfectly understandable. When I first started, I think I just kind of listened in for the first several meetings when I was a community member. But yeah, I think that's what I've noticed. Usually new folks will hold back a little bit until they're comfortable and they'll start sharing more. Sometimes, depending on what people want to talk about, and they'll send topics that they're interested in or would like to have a discussion about in the registration form ahead of time, so I know how to lead the discussion. in addition to being like a community support group, again, community support group, not like a counselor-led support group, just disclaimer, it can also be just a very friendly, casual group. I notice that a lot too when we get together in person. I really like that during the in-person meetings, it's easier for folks to kind of break up into smaller individual conversations. I think one of the limitations of the Zoom meetings is that it's one virtual meeting room with anywhere from like five to 15 participants. So we kind of have to make sure that if there are a lot of people that want to say something, we can't let anyone talk for too long of a time, which is unfortunate because a lot of neurodivergent folks preferred method of communication is info dumping at one another, which takes a lot of time. So that is a constraint of the virtual program. So folks have really enjoyed being able to get together in person. And I've really enjoyed being able to see people have much longer conversations that I don't have to like step in to cut people off because somebody else wants to talk, because I have a couple people over here that are talking about something that interests them for like 15 minutes and another group of people over here talking about a different topic that's interesting to them, and they can just go on, and it's great. I'm very happy that NJCTS is able to provide both a virtual and in-person venue for this program. I think it makes it more accessible to a larger amount of people.
Yeah, Peyton, what are you thinking?
So I agree with a lot of what Alina was saying, but I've sort of learned my own kind of do etiquette. Someone's speaking and I've been kind of sitting through high school. I would literally be like raising my hand and I would shaking it and I would be lowering it and raising it. Like it's such a pain in the butt that honestly virtual so if you go to the bottom of like Zoom, for example, and you go to like React, there's different little like some emojis and stuff, but like there's also a raise hand feature. And you can raise your hand, and then I believe Alina, the host, and Michael, the host can see that, like, oh, this person is raising their hand, and they kind of want to speak. And I've even kind of other people have reacted and being like, oh, that's a feature. Oh, you can use that. I'm like, yeah, if anybody is interested, because it's a nice way, because I tend to have a lot I want to say. So sometimes I sort of...
It keeps guiding the flow of it, too. It's good for the host to see that and then be able to, point to that. Something we don't really have in, like, other kinds of venues like in person or something. It's a way to help make it work better,
right?
Virtual. I want to now bring our conversation to the broader topic of building community around Tourette. I think we have spoken a lot about this specific program, which is one way to get involved with the Tourette community and also getting to meet other neurodivergent individuals and allies of our community and make friends, get questions answered, all of that. It's not limited to just this program. There's a lot of ways that you can build community, and wherever you are right now, each person can build that community. Not everyone is able to join our meetings. For example, they tend to be at night, and if someone's working a job at night or has other commitments, they wouldn't be able to. I would love to hear if either of you have thoughts on any strategies out there that our listeners can use to build their own community.
Yeah, I think building community is one of the most important things you can do. Not just as a neurodivergent individual, but as anyone. But I think human connection is really what keeps us going as people. And when you're neurodivergent or you're queer or a member of any type of marginalized group, it can be very isolating and a lot harder to find community just in regular day-to-day life. So finding different affinity groups can be super helpful. And I also note, I want to note that what I'm saying about community building now is my opinion and based on anecdotes and patterns that I've observed. This is not like an official NJCTS stance or anything. So I just want to add that little disclaimer. But yeah, I think humans are a social species, so it's super important for everyone to have a community. I think it's increasingly difficult to find community in person nowadays. I think part of it is probably because so many things shut down during quarantine in the pandemic and a lot just didn't open back up. I think we're also as a society moving a lot more towards online spaces than in-person activities. I remember when I was a kid there were like roller rinks everywhere and a lot more like in-person physical activities that you could just do with people and meet people. And I think we're losing that a bit, and it takes a lot more effort to like meet people outside. So I think online communities can be super valuable for that reason.
Definitely, there's been a decline in third spaces, I've heard them called, with the, I found this term interesting. I was reading an article on how, like, so often if you want to meet with someone in person, you have to like spend money. You like their coffee shop, you go to, like, we don't really have, and I've heard the term like called third spaces before, places like a library or a park where you can just kind of go and exist as a person and socialize, meet other people without having to spend money. And we need more of them in the world, but I think until then, the online avenue is an excellent place to go to for some of that.
Huge proponent of public libraries. They have a lot of great programs that you can meet local people through.
And yeah, actually, that kind of ties into, Alina and Michael, what you were saying. Like, there are definitely spaces like that exist, but I've personally seen for myself a lot of the limitations of, not in the way that these programs are bad or maliciously designed, but personally for me, like Community Connections and NJCTS, NJCTS kind of at large, I can't make it to NJCTS because I forget if it's Somerset or Somerville, whichever one it is, but that's like an hour plus away from me. So, I just don't feel comfortable driving. And I think, not to sound entitled, but I think I should have the right to have some other mechanism or venue to be able to travel besides always relying on my mom. I don't really use like Uber or Lyft, and there is obviously like a financial barrier if you don't make a lot of money and, you don't have consistent transportation, that really that local transportation, like a bus service or shuttle service, or that is a much better remedy, I think. I'm also sort of defined sometimes by my own limitations and having to kind of come out of my shell a bit. One thing is, Alina, you were saying kind of about public libraries. There's a bunch of different branches of the Mercer County Library. They do have some limited online programming. I think they have like an online book club, which I went to a meeting or two of. I didn't really stick with it, I think personally, because I'm not a huge reader. So, Alina and Michael, maybe we can talk about it a little bit. I think for me personally, I'm someone who tends to be very self-isolated. And when I went back to community college last year, I was briefly part of the Rainbow Alliance, which was their LGBTQ plus club. And they actually had a Discord. So I joined that for a bit, but I left college. And so I'm not really part of that group anymore. But using apps like Discord and, other people like to use like WhatsApp or whatever, or sometimes just texting and group texts are like a good way to connect with people. And, I think there are certain limitations, as we've discussed, kind of the community connections meetings themselves.
We are interested in branching out to other locations if we can make it there and we have a space to meet, to make our in-person sessions more accessible to the community that isn't necessarily close to Somerville or able to get there from far away. But yeah, that's something we're interested in doing at some point for sure.
Yeah, so one of the themes I'm hearing is there are spaces that exist for neurodivergent people to get to meet each other, to talk, to hang out, to make friendships, but that they're not perfect, that there are challenges we have with them. And I'd love to spend a little bit of time, because we've got two people here that know these spaces well, have been participants, and Alina, you're hosting one actively. I want to do some solution ideation here. So for example, Alina, you'd mentioned earlier about one of the challenges with Zoom, or I guess one of the downsides of it, is that it's not as conducive for one-on-one interactions. Like if you have a big group setting, 10 people in the Zoom call, you're kind of all going around, one person talks at a time. You can't form necessarily that one-on-one dialogue, unless I suppose you do breakout groups or something. But want to hear some thoughts on if there's anything that comes to mind to remedy that you've tried or have been thinking about.
Particularly, you kind of alluded to the idea of breakout groups, and I think that's actually a potential. So one of the things I learned through doing online education a little bit is that we were able to do things like you said, like breakout groups. So I think if, Alina, I don't know how this works for you because you're kind of our fearless leader. You as the facilitator, kind of, I don't know if you can set up, like maybe do a specific meeting where you set it up ahead of time where you're going to do breakout groups or something. for people. I think something that was actually being thrown around, I think we were talking a while ago, either early this year or late last year, about Tourette's and dating. And I think that's something that's come up a lot. But we had sort of discussed a little bit the idea of even like a friend event where it's like a fast friends, I think was the casual name we kind of threw around, was where we had like a breakout rooms or some type of thing where people could have one-on-one conversations and get to like quickly meet and learn a little bit about each other. And maybe that, not to facilitate like dating or romantic relationships, but being an unintended side effect is not like a bad thing. Hey, it being a positive of like, you might meet people and you might meet a really cool friend or possibly the love of your life, or a life partner. That's kind of the intent of spaces, is even if it's not a space that's specifically for romantic relationships, a lot of people describe being married as you're married to your best friend. And I think that's a problem for a lot of people, is they go out and they're looking for romantic relationships, when I've heard a big piece of advice is sort of just go out looking for people, look for friends, don't try and look too hard for a relationship. And that can sort of resolve some of the trouble with that aspect. So that was like one thing. So I think doing the breakout groups either during the community connections style of meeting or doing a specific event that is about the breakout group, I don't know if we could maybe revive that idea and possibly execute it, Alina.
I remember talking about Fast Friends idea a while back. I think that was pretty new to NJCTS as an employee. Yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. I've never hosted a meeting with that kind of setup virtually before, so I would definitely need to look into how that's done, both logistically on Zoom and also how to keep it properly moderated. But that is a really good idea, and I might be interested in looking into it.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on opportunities to put in some solutions, make our communities better, to make them to solve for some of the challenges that have come up.
I think part of what we try to do, at least with Community Connections, is that I'm always asking for feedback from people. So if there's an issue, like Peyton said that he can't get to in-person meetings and things, okay, at some point can we find a space closer to people that want to meet in person but can't get to our current meeting spaces? So, and again, we're a very small organization, so we don't have the capacity to like implement every idea that we come across all at once. It can be a pretty slow process to make changes in programs. But one thing we've done before, we realized that I think Community Connections for adults with Tourette Syndrome actually started as Community Connections for young adults with Tourette Syndrome, and it was capped from age 18 to 35. But we were getting a lot of folks at Tourette Talks and webinars, other programs we run that are adults with Tourette's above 35. And, we would talk a lot in Community Connections as adults of resources just not really being there for adults as much. And, you turn 18, your Tourette's doesn't go away. And, that it also extends to folks over the age of 35. So recently we changed the program so the 35-year-old cap is no longer there. And we've gotten a good amount of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s even. So I think that's a change that I'm proud that we've made. And I always want to hear feedback if there's something that the program could be doing better, or if there's ways to make it more accessible that community members have ideas about. I am always open to hearing them.
But thankfully, Community Connections is not like a professionals network. It's more just like casual conversation. But you feel a comfort level with a lot of these people. And as a group, contacting people even outside in the meetings, sometimes that's through email. Sometimes that's through, I have their number or we shared numbers. Sometimes that's through texting. I do feel a degree of comfort with some of these people. And some of the older folks that had joined more recently since we opened the group up, Alina, were really helpful at trying to help me find a sense of kind of perspective, and actually were like way less judgmental than I sort of like my preconceived notions thought. Not that I think older people are just going to be more judgmental, but for example, I just switched therapists recently and I'm with a woman who's, a very cool person, and I think we're making some good progress. She's a bit of an older woman, and I was nervous to have a woman as a therapist or have especially as older woman, because I think, if I'm being honest, it sounds insensitive, but I think of, older woman therapist, I think sort of prudish and, like maybe a little bit judgmental, especially about things related to kind of men's issues and, maybe things like sexual health and issues. And, I won't go any more specifically into that, but just I think that's sort of preconceived notions that I had that maybe were wrong, but I still had them and they still actively prevented me from seeking that type of care. But when I opened myself up a little bit and just said, kind of screw it, I found this great therapist who is comforting me a little bit, but also challenging me in ways that maybe I wasn't being challenged in therapy before. And so that's kind of outside of the scope of NJCTS and Community Connections.
And you bring up a good point, Peyton, too, around like the value of that diversity can bring in when you have programs like Community Connections or any kind of community building initiative. Yeah, oftentimes we're surprised when we meet people that are different than us. We tend to get different perspectives, and that can be really helpful for us. I have been really privileged to have met a lot of older people with Tourette's who grew up with it at such a different time. So their perspective, they almost, not all of them, but I've noticed many have kind of this hardened resilience because they went through Tourette when we knew so much less and so much less support existed for it. And it's interesting. It almost gives me as where I'm at in my life a little bit of, I don't know, just a better, more holistic kind of understanding of like, it's going to be okay because these guys, I see what they had and the problems that I feel I'm going through, not to delegitimize them, but like it gives it perspective. It's going to be all right. It's going to work out. I'm going to, hopefully live into very long into my adulthood as well and can thrive with Tourette. So I think bringing diverse people together that have those perspectives is, really enriching for all of us.
Yeah, Michael, quick question in response to that. Do you feel like there's a sense of hope? Because I think I deal with a lot of anxiety and depression personally, and a sense of, I'm always filling out those questionnaires when I kind of have to do a different online practitioner. And it's like, do you feel hopeless? And I'm like, yes, constantly. I feel a lot of hopelessness about the future, sometimes about the present, and, also discomfort about the past and the present. It's hard to be hopeful for the future.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I do think there's a lot of reason to feel hopeful. One thing that I've kind of been surprised about in adulthood is that when things feel like they're going well in life, it's a job, your relationship, your tics, your mental health, whatever it is, let me say when there's challenges going on, I think we expect recovery improvement to be like this linear thing, like it just kind of keeps getting better incrementally and at least for me that's often not the case. I find that success or feeling like things are going well kind of happens in like staggers. Joel, like something big will happen, you get an amazing job or a pay raise, or you meet a really interesting person that transforms your life, and these things are so hard. Like when you're in the midst of that dark era, that depression in your life going through, you wouldn't even conceive of that happening, and it comes as a surprise then, a really pleasant surprise when it does happen. And you're like, wow, in the last year, I have grown so much because of these couple of things that happened in my life. And that's really been the beauty that I've seen that kind of surprised me. Growth and improvement wasn't for me this linear thing. Every day is a little better and you're building in progress piece by piece. If it works like that for you, great. I found it was a little bit more jaggedy for me and still upward, but and then you still have days where you're 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. But in the long term, yes, I find that, I feel I'm growing, improving, bettering myself. And I think there's a lot of reason to be hopeful as members of our community, especially as the word gets out more about Tourette and more treatment and support options become available and more community becomes accessible for people.
I definitely think that I agree with you, Michael, that progress is not necessarily linear. It's sort of a cognitive mistake that we make, thinking that things are just going to gradually get better. And, it can seem very hopeless when, there are setbacks. But I think there's a certain freedom, to acknowledging there are so many factors outside of your control, but hopefully being almost like hyper aware of those factors. And you can't be aware of everything, and knowing that as well, just like knowing you can't be aware of everything, but that your failures are not always your own.
Yeah, that's great. And what I was going to say about solutions for finding community and mitigating isolation and stuff is a lot of it can be very scary, but if there's something you're looking for and it's not there oftentimes, sometimes what needs to happen is you need to try to make it yourself, which again can be very scary and overwhelming, but it's, I think, worth a try. And like Peyton was saying, like sometimes things happen, it's not your fault. If you're trying to get a community started, you're trying to do a meetup group or an affinity group or something, and if nothing's sticking, don't think to yourself like, oh, it must be because I'm a terrible organizer, I'm a bad leader, or I just an awful person and nobody wants to be around me. Like, that's not what's happening. Community organizing is hard. So anybody that is out there that is working on community building, whether it's trying to integrate into something that's already there or build something new, you're doing a great job, and keep working at it. Keep going.
Yeah, dial yourself up. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah. One other thing about community building that Peyton mentioned this earlier about having like preconceived notions and things, and anxieties about like, oh, if I go to this group already that's already meeting, am I going to be talking too much? Am I going to be personable enough? Are people going to like me? What if everyone hates me and I can never show my face there again? Those are judgments that you are both having about yourself and projecting onto other people, which again, very understandable. A lot of us have anxiety, and that is very natural for anxieties to take form in that way. But I think if you can approach it with a gentle curiosity of, okay, I'm nervous that if I go to this group, everyone's going to hate me. Why is that? Why am I assuming that the people there are going to be hateful? Maybe I've experienced discrimination or harassment for like taking in public or something, or other number of other things that could that one could be discriminated against for. But if you're looking to become less isolated, having a lot of walls up is going to be counterproductive. And the walls are there. If you've built a lot of walls up, it's probably for a good reason. I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying people need to not be sensitive about people microaggressing them. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think it can help to look inward, try to dismantle your own preconceived notions about people, and not just things like, oh, I'm stereotyping somebody of a marginalized group, and that's a stereotype that I need to unlearn, but also thinking, oh, this person is going to be awful to me because I have Tourette's or I'm queer or something. That you may have learned that people are going to treat you badly, but that doesn't mean that every single person you meet is going to. So I think meeting that with a gentle curiosity of, okay, how is this interaction with this stranger going to go? And meeting people that way, and not immediately assuming this is going to be terrible, because that's how it's always been. Patterns can always be broken. So that would be my advice, to try to keep an open mind and try to meet all of your preconceived notions and judgments with some gentle curiosity.
Yeah. One final thought in kind of response to that is just, I think I've sort of more lately thrown caution to the wind, and kind of because of the current climate we're in, I think I felt a sense of urgency. Obviously, there's a level of you don't want to harass or badger people, but I sat on that email for maybe a day or two, and but I still decided to send it out to all those people. I collected all the emails. I wrote the email. I rewrote it at least maybe 2 or 3 times. I sat on it for a bit, but I still sent it out a couple days later. I actually scheduled it, and then I was like, this email is going out. And I think throwing caution to the wind, like, I'm not someone who is dismantling my things, because, I'm definitely working through some stuff in therapy. But I mean, you don't necessarily have to dismantle sort of the trauma as much as sometimes, if you can, this isn't going to work for everybody. But for me, just throwing caution to the wind and saying, well, the past was the past. Yesterday was yesterday. Today is another day. And maybe if I act differently today than I did yesterday, things can actually change. Maybe not always in my favor, but they can change. And again, progress is not linear. So if you hit a setback, it's not always indicative of what you did wrong. But can you learn lessons from it? Absolutely. I think you can.
Yeah.
Love that, Peyton. I always ask people at the end of podcast around what advice they have for young people. In this podcast episode, it may be around what advice you have around community building. And I think you've both provided some really great thoughts around that our listeners can put to use. Any other remaining thoughts while we're on the call here? Really, again, appreciate both of you taking the time to be on the uptick. Any other last minute urging, fiery thoughts you want to get out of your system before we close things?
Yeah, I think just one final thought about finding community and building community is that it's very similar to the progress isn't linear. It's not going to happen overnight. I think a lot of folks are really isolated and lonely and they want to find something and really gel. But every relationship and every community, it's not something that's just found. It is something that is built. So I think keeping that in mind and really trying to be present in the moments where you are building community or you're at a community event. Maybe you're really nervous because it's really scary to be somewhere new surrounded by a lot of people you don't know. And it can be so easy to just focus on any of the faux pas that you might have made or, oh God, I ticked too loud and people looked at me. But there are probably also going to be some moments where you share a little connection with someone or just have a really nice conversation or just see a twinkle in somebody's eye as you're speaking to them. And I think it's really important to pay attention to those little successes because those are the things that build over time. And at some point you might realize like, oh, I have a community and it's not necessarily something that you just found and were embraced into, but it was something that you built together with all these other people that wanted to build community. So I think that's the last thing that I would say.
Wonderful point to end on. I like that. Well, Alina and Peyton, thank you so much for being on the uptick. Join us next time.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering you to stretch the boundaries to live your best life.